What's going on, y'all? We got episode 12, season 2, Let's Be Real podcast, man. And look, this is going to be our Super Bowl special, man. Um, like I know we was gonna get some people on, just didn't end up working out. So hopefully we'll get some people up in here for after the Super Bowl to just go over how the game went. But yeah, man. So we're gonna go straight into the Super Bowl with this. But look, as always, we start with the wine. This wine, look, never tried it before, and so y'all gonna get my kind of just instant reaction on it. It was given to me as a gift, so I don't know how much it cost. I don't know nothing like that. Um, but I'll give y'all the name. I'll give y'all what I think about it. And so, name of it is going to be Chateau Vieille Tour Bordeaux Superieur. This is what it looked like. In case y'all want to go and grab it. Don't know where it's from. Like I said, it was given to me. And yeah, we're gonna go ahead. We'll give it a taste here. Got me a little glass already poured. All right, so it's all right, man. I give it maybe like 6.5 out of 10 or so. Definitely has a lot of like tobacco smell to it. And as far as flavor, definitely get a lot of like oak, some dark fruit. Not a huge fan of it, but it's very dry, which I typically like. But yeah, I mean, look, if y'all like a more oaky kind of dry Bordeaux style wine, I think it's a solid one. Um, Again, I'll put the name and everything down in the description. So if that's something you think, then yeah, I would say go give it a try. My guess is it's probably not too expensive. But yeah, I give it 6.5. I probably wouldn't go buy it, but I mean I'll drink it. Y'all know me. I'm gonna drink some wine. So, but all right, man. Look, like I said, so we're going straight into the Super Bowl. That's all we're doing today. Next week we'll have the Super Bowl reaction, and then look, we're just full diving into the NBA. So I'm excited for that. Y'all know that's basketball is kind of my forte, my thing, and so I'm really excited for that. But look, let's get to this Super Bowl. So shorter episode today because we're only going over the Super Bowl, and then this is going to drop day of the Super Bowl, probably right around like noon or so. And so, um, yeah, so let's get to it, man. Um, so starting off, obviously we got Seattle versus New England, and just kind of going through this, man. I just took some things that I either have been asked about the Super Bowl by some people, things I saw that I thought would be good talking points. And so I think to start this, let's start this with Sam Darnold and just how it should be viewed now moving forward of as far as quarterbacks that have been given up on. Does Sam Darnold kind of make us change how we view these quarterbacks? And this is something I did discuss with some people um, who were like, well, obviously, Sam Darnold look like given up on by a couple teams, like, and then you see guys like Geno, you see guys like Baker giving up on some teams. And my thing with it is like, yes, we do have examples, and most recently, most notably right now is Sam Darnold at the quarterback position where, given up on and over the last 2 years has just popped. And what I would say is for every Sam Darnold we have, for every Geno Smith, for every Baker Mayfield, we've got two or three examples of guys that it didn't work out for. And we don't see them in the league anymore. And so now maybe if those guys would have gotten a third, fourth chance, maybe they would have. I would say Darnold, Baker, those guys are a little different because they were top picks. So obviously they're because of the talent level they have, they're going to get those extra opportunities. But we've seen top picks not work out. And I don't think this is going to be some huge, like, we're going to start seeing a bunch of thrown away quarterbacks start really excelling and getting to Super Bowls. Um, I think Sam Darnold was extremely talented. Like I was high on him for a long time coming out of college. Um, but I just think one, he got put into a very good situation. 2, his talent obviously is there. But 3, like, let's be really honest here. When we look at the guys like that we had seen successful kind of like reconstruction project or restoration projects, right? Up until Darnold, it was Geno and Baker who in the playoffs, I mean, but Baker's got, a couple wins. Geno, I don't think has a win at all. But it's not like we started seeing these guys having massive success in playoff runs, right? Like they're good quarterbacks. They're good quarterbacks. Baker, I would say, is kind of like pushing that, top 7 to 10 area. Geno at the time prior to this year, I would say probably pushing that like 12 area. So Darnold's the first guy we've really seen with a guy getting multiple chances and then popping and then going deep in the playoffs. And so I think right now with just how quarterbacks are handled, I would mostly agree. Like quarterbacks are handled in a pretty good way. Now, look, it's still the hardest position to scout as far as who's going to be incredible, who's not. I mean, when you look at the top quarterbacks in the league right now that we talk about, right? Like Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, and Burrow, you're looking at one top pick there. Burrow was the number 1 pick. Mahomes and Allen were kind of, I believe, mid-first rounders, if I remember right. Lamar was a late pick, I think early second round, and they wanted him to be a receiver. So the position itself is still one of the hardest positions to evaluate. But I think as far as once they have them in the building, once you have a couple seasons, as far as seeing them, I think most of the time they get it right. And, I'll just use the example of like Tua. Tua was a guy where I said I wouldn't have paid him. And now I think the Dolphins have kind of realized like, dang, we probably shouldn't have paid him. We probably should have just ate the first round pick and, started the rebuild over because now they're starting again 3 years later. And so I think there's a lot more cases where it's a Tua situation where it's like, yeah, you have a guy who, even in Tua's case, you have a guy who can do really well in a structured system with great players around him, but probably isn't worth the money to pay him and probably isn't a guy who is going to carry your team and lift your team through a playoff run. And so that's just my thoughts on that. Like I said, I think the quarterback position itself is still handled really well as far as from the NFL point of view. I will say, I think the one thing that this does point out is how incompetent the Jets are at it, because when you really look at it, 2 of the guys we've seen, Geno and Sam, who are in that kind of restoration mode that, are kind of some of the examples of this, both came through the Jets. So sneaky winner on this maybe is Zach Wilson, a guy who was taken early because of the talent he had shown. Again, I'm not a big Zach Wilson fan, but I think he might be a guy where you see maybe, especially if you see him get with one of these, offensive guru guys, maybe he's a guy that you look at as like, okay, we'll take a chance on him just because it looks like the Jets are completely incompetent. But look, man, now let's get to the game itself. And so something I've been seeing a lot of as far as debated around is who's got the better defense and which defense do you trust in this game? And so me personally, look, I think Seattle has the better defense. However, I do think the Patriots defense has been playing extremely well through this playoff run. Now, it's hard to really judge the Patriots on how well that defense has been playing because when you go through round by round, first round you have Justin Herbert, who I think we talked about last podcast. 1, did not look like he wanted to pass the ball or really even play football that day. 2, we've seen him in the playoff multiple times now, and it's a meltdown every time. So while obviously the defense has to go out there and make plays because, I think as bad as Herbert has been in the playoffs, if guys are running open, he'll still find them, right? So you still got to get pressure. You still got to cover. Like, I think they did well with that. But I think when you go back and watch that game, there were shots to be had that Herbert could have taken that you could see or not see, but you could tell it seemed like he was scared to take. So that one's a little hard to judge. Next one, you have CJ Stroud, who another guy where it's just now with him it's a little different. We have seen him play well in playoff games, but as of late, he has not been the quarterback we saw playing well in playoff games. And so again, how much credit do you want to give to that Pats defense for it? I don't know if you can give it as much credit as it maybe looks. Just because when you look at CJ, it wasn't just that they were, you know, in his face all night and causing all these things. Like CJ made terrible throws when he wasn't under pressure. He made terrible decisions when he wasn't under pressure. And then he made terrible decisions when he was under pressure. And so again, it's just like, how much credit can you give the Patriots for that? And then the last one, look, you played Jake Stidham or Jarrett Stidham, whatever his name, Jarrett Stidham. You played Jarrett Stidham. It's like backup quarterback who, yeah, well, I'm sure Sean Payton said he's basically, an MVP candidate if he was to start. It was Jarrett Stidham. There's a reason he's bounced around the league as a backup and hasn't started a game in a few years. So, again, you got to go out there if you're the Patriots defense. You got to execute. And look, they're doing things like getting pressure on the ball or getting pressure on the quarterback that they didn't do during the regular season. So you got to give them props. Broncos O-line is good. And they were able to get some pressure. And so I do think they're trending up. They're playing their best football at the end of the year, which is always what you want from all your units, right? But I still think overall, even though, we've seen the Seahawks get lit up by the Rams, I don't think the Patriots offense is comparable to the Rams offense. So I trust Seattle a lot more as far as defensively for what they've done all year, what they did in their first playoff matchup against the Niners, who, say what you want about the Niners injuries, a lot of those were on defense, and their offense was never really a problem. And so for them to do that, I think their defense is better. And as far as who I trust, I have to go with the Seahawks defense as well. Because, and here's my biggest thing on this, is, and I don't know if it's talked about enough, is when you look at Mike Macdonald's defenses over the last 2 years since 2024, when they've played against young quarterbacks, 24 and under, Drake May is obviously now 23. Those quarterbacks in those games, there's been 6 games. Those quarterbacks are 0-6 with a 58% completion percentage. They average a 58% completion percentage. They average 160 yards, and they get sacked roughly 3.5 times per game. And in those games, all 6 of them, those quarterbacks have managed 2 total touchdowns and have thrown 5 picks. And so I think when you look at Mike Macdonald's defense, Drake May hasn't seen it. Young quarterback. And then through this playoff run also has struggled holding on to the ball. So I think when I look at that too, it's just, again, I think the Patriots defense has played extremely well in the playoffs, but as far as who do I trust against the other quarterback, I mean, I got to go with, while I still think Sam Darnold he's you have the possibility of the implosion, right? I just don't I trust Seattle's defense because I've seen what they can do against young quarterbacks consistently. And so that's why I got to go with them. Next question, man. So when I was talking to one of my boys about this, and this one came up as far as like, okay, well, if you had to pick a blowout. Now, mind you, I don't think this is going to be a blowout kind of game. Later on in the show, I'll make my pick. I'll say who what score I think it is, everything, who I pick, what I think the score is. But if we had to pick a blowout, who would it be? Mainly because he was like, look, the Patriots, their offense was able to shred them up, like defense was able to hold Sam Darnold, like it could get ugly for Seattle. And my thing is, I'm like, to me, the more likely scenario, like you said, if you told me it's going to be a blowout, I would have to say Seattle blows out the Patriots. And that's just because I don't think Seattle's defense is going to be blowoutable. Like that defense is too good that, I mean, we have seen Sam Darnold in games against competition that I would think is better than the Patriots, namely the Rams. We've seen him throw 4 interceptions in a game and be in the game. We've seen him throw 3 interceptions in a game and be in the We've seen him have terrible, terrible games, and Seattle has a chance to win at the end and has won those games in the end. So to me, it's just it's tough too because you don't have a lot of great teams that the Patriots have played with. It's just the sample size isn't big, and there's not really a sample size for it as far as with the Patriots in that same kind of situation, just because their schedule is so much easier. But to me, if I'm going to pick a blowout, it's got to be Seattle. Like I said, that's not what I'm picking. I yeah, I don't think that Patriots offense can do enough against that Seattle defense. And I don't think that Seattle defense is blowoutable. And so that's my thoughts on that. Next, man, let's move into as far as who's going to win the Super Bowl MVP. If I had to choose like a dark horse MVP, actually, we're going to wait on that because I feel like that might, we'll do it. We'll do it. So Super Bowl MVP to me, and I'll give you as far as who I actually think is going to win it at the end. But to me, I think the obvious answer, Super Bowl MVP, it's going to be one of the quarterbacks, right? Whoever, my thoughts are, if one of these teams wins the game, it's going to be the quarterback making a couple big, like, memorable plays. And I'm not even necessarily saying like they're going to have these huge games, but I think they're going to have to make a couple plays here and there that are just going to be so like memorable that it's going to get them that MVP. If I had to go with a non-quarterback, I'd probably go with, I think the Patriots. I think if they're going to win, it would have to be Drake May. I think if Seattle's going to win, I could see it maybe being like a Kenneth Walker just goes crazy maybe. And so I could maybe see a Kenneth Walker situation. But as far as like a dark horse MVP, I'm going to give y'all one from each team, I think. Patriots dark horse, I think Travion Henderson. Just because of his big play ability, I could see, he's just got the ability to bust off a couple big runs and break the game open or just kind of ice the game, something like that I could see. And then on the other side of it, I could see like a Rashid Shaheed, a guy, and I'm usually not too big on doing receivers just because they're dependent. But Rashid Shaheed, the way he's used and just the things he can do that wouldn't add up to quarterback stats, like in the special teams game, the punt return, or on those end arounds, kind of things like that, those reverses. It's just something like that. I could see him going crazy, having a couple big plays. And so I could see on the Seattle side, kind of a dark horse MVP being Rashid Shaheed, on the Patriots side being Travion Henderson. And now let's move in. Let's kind of stick in this situation as far as Super Bowl MVPs and who that would mean more for out of those quarterback positions, because I think that's a really interesting conversation, right? Because obviously, when we look at these quarterbacks, when they get to, who's the best quarterbacks in the league? Who is, when they're at the Hall of Fame, like who's a Hall of Famer when we're projecting out? And so I think if we're to take these quarterbacks for what they are right now, I think as far as who the Super Bowl MVP would mean more for in the short term, like I said, just like if we're just looking at them where they're at right now, I'd have to say Drake May, just because Drake May to this point, you're talking about a guy in his second year in the Super Bowl, 14-win season, and with a team around him that less than stellar weapons, let's say, like good tight ends. They have, Stephon, who was kind of thought as of, kind of washed and not really at his peak anymore. So it's just when you look at the offense, they got some great running backs, I would say, but it's not a lot there. And so the fact that you have a guy in his second year with not the greatest supporting cast offensively around him, who's able to get to a Super Bowl, and if obviously winning the Super Bowl MVP means he's won the Super Bowl, you're talking about a guy in year going into year 3 with a Super Bowl MVP, and a second place finish in the NFL MVP. That is setting him up on a Hall of Fame trajectory, right? Like we would then look at him as well as looking at just kind of what we can see as far as like the talent he has, what he's done this early in his career, and look at him and say, okay, he is on pace to be a Hall of Famer. Whereas, like right now, I don't know if we have that with Sam Darnold because, well, look, Sam Darnold's had a great 2 seasons. We've also seen the entire beginning of his career. Now, the only way I could see this meaning more for Sam Darnold is if Sam Darnold starts going on a run of, let's say he plays another 6, 7 seasons at the level he's playing at, not even necessarily winning more Super Bowls, but just 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, whatever it is, right? 40 touchdown, like whatever his stats you want to project out. If he does that another 6, 7 years, then you're talking about a guy where it's like, oh, you got a guy who we have now seen a large sample size of great play, got a ton of wins, and has a Super Bowl win and a Super Bowl MVP. Now you're looking at a guy where it's like, okay, maybe he makes a Hall of Fame case. It's kind of going to be the same case, I think, to a lesser extent as Matt Stafford after he won that Super Bowl in LA. I think the MVP this year solidified him as a Hall of Famer. But prior to it, you're like, okay, like maybe. Granted, like I said, not the exact same because Stafford had years where he was just putting up crazy numbers that you don't have from Sam Darnold in the early years. But I think again, if we look at Drake May as like, okay, even if he loses this Super Bowl, are the chances of him getting back decent? We could say yeah. Like we now, granted, we have seen a guy like Burrow get to a Super Bowl and now is can't get back in the playoffs. But when we look at it, we're like, okay, chances are Drake May will possibly get back to another one, maybe win one, maybe win an MVP or two. And so like even with the loss, I can still see him building out that Hall of Fame career. Whereas like Sam Darnold, if he loses a Super Bowl, even if he's able to put up crazy numbers over the next 6, 7 years, he'll just be a really good quarterback. Whereas like I think that Super Bowl MVP could kind of push him into, hey, he might get Hall of Fame. He might show up on the ballot. Now, if I don't think he would get in, but he'd show up on the ballot. And so I think that's where if we're looking down 6, 7 years down the road, if things go right for Darnold, it could mean more for him. But I think, like I said, right now, if we're just projecting from what we know right now, I would say it's got to be Drake May that it means more for. Next, man, we're going to stick with the quarterbacks here and go through what quarterback I think, or what quarterback I trust to have a clean game. And this is one that I saw on a show they were discussing. And to me, the answer is neither. Like, I don't think either quarterback is going to have a clean game. I think both quarterbacks are turnover prone. We've seen Darnold with the picks all year. Granted, a lot of those came in those Rams games. But Darnold, he's one of those guys that, look, he's going to sling it. And when you got guys who sling it, they typically throw a pick or two. And so that coupled with Drake May and his playoffs, this just kind of postseason run, I could see a fumble or two, maybe a pick. But so yeah, my inclination is to say neither of these guys are going to have a clean game. I just don't think that's how they play, and it's how they haven't played like that. So I think the real question then becomes who can handle the mistakes. And so the quarterback I trust who can handle the mistake the most is actually, as kind of crazy as this is going to sound, is Sam Darnold. Because again, I'm just going to go back to that defense, right? Where Sam Darnold's had games this year where he's made mistakes and you're like, oh, this is going to cost him. And that defense bails him out and keeps him in the game and gives him that chance to win. Now, what I will say is Drake May, as far as if he was to make a turnover and, not play a clean game, I think with him, it's going to become when it happens. And I mean, I guess with either, but I think if either of these guys has a turnover early, I think Darnold would be able to get over that more just because I think that defense is going to keep them in it. If Drake May has an early turnover that leads to points, and then you're dealing with that Seattle defense from behind all game, pause. I think that's where it could get rough for Drake. But on the positive side, the thing he does have in his corner is Josh McDaniels, who's been a part of a 28-3 comeback, who's seen every situation in the Super Bowl. And look, we saw it last game when Drake May was, maybe a little in his head and Josh McDaniels having to go over there and give him that pep talk. Again, like, it seems unfair to him because look, he's a young kid, still second year in the league, biggest game he's ever played into that point. But it's not something we can unsee. And so I think, is it something where if things aren't going his way in this game, look, the pressure is only amplified in the Super Bowl. So could I see him maybe starting to kind of lose the reins a little bit, needing Josh to bring him back in? And can he do that? I trust that McDaniel's going to be able to tell him what he needs to hear. But again, young kid in the Super Bowl who's already been kind of having a rough playoff go, I could see, maybe that spiraling on him. And so I think Darnold's in a better place, not even as much to handle the mistakes, but I think the team is more equipped to handle the mistakes that Darnold makes as opposed to the Patriots and Drake May, just because of the opponent. And look, both these teams have been great all year. I think Seattle's 5-1 when they lose the turnover battle, or their quarterback throws I think it's multiple turnovers. Seattle's 5-1, Patriots are 4-1. Like, both teams are great at it, but I think that also comes into play as far as who they played against, right? And so I think Seattle's just more equipped. I think Darnold, because he's seen that he can still go out and win a game and play great after he's made mistakes, I think that helps him and Seattle's case for that. Now, what I will go into now is we're going to start getting into, as far as the game itself, who I think has the biggest advantage or what each team's biggest advantage and biggest weaknesses are. And so for me, as far as if we're looking at kind of ranking out both teams and who's got the best advantage and where, I think the best advantage overall, and I would say it's not even really close, is going to be the Patriots and that coaching staff. I think between Vrabel having played in Super Bowls, winning Super Bowls, being a part of, everything that goes into it as a player, I think that is a huge advantage. I also think Josh McDaniels, who has coached in, I think they said this is his 10th Super Bowl appearance. Like, again, a guy who's seen everything in a Super Bowl. So it's he knows what to expect. He knows kind of what needs to be said to the players. And one of the things you always hear about Super Bowls is it's like different from any other game, as far as, obviously it's the Super Bowl, but like from a standpoint of you got to warm up at different times. Like, you can't go out there and warm up too early. The halftime is different because it's so much longer. So it's, just those things that Seattle's coaching staff just doesn't have experience with, that the Patriots coaching staff has experience in every possible way you could have it. Not only that, I also think, now look, I'm taking nothing away from Mike McDonald. I think he's been incredible. I think he is an incredible coach. Vrabel might be the best situational and just knowing what he can get away with and like these little things in games that give them an advantage. Vrabel is probably the best coach in the league with those things, and it's been like that for years. And so, to me, the biggest advantage for either team is going to be that Patriots coaching staff. Next one is got to be, look, I've talked about them the whole time. Seattle's defense. That Seattle defense, with especially with how they play against those young quarterbacks and just the things they can do, I would say has to be ranked second. I think for the kind of biggest weaknesses, look, I think it's tough to say because you're talking about two teams that are in the Super Bowl because they have great teams, right? It's not like they have these superstar quarterbacks carrying them through. So to me, biggest weaknesses when we're looking at from the Patriot side is going to be the O-line and Will Campbell. Like, because here's the thing, Will Campbell has not had a great playoff run, and it's not going to be any easier this game. And I hate to kind of single out one guy in a whole unit as far as the weakness, but it's what it is. And so I think the game, again, I think the game for the Patriots, if it were to get ugly, it's probably a combination of Drake May under pressure, taking sacks, making a mistake, or a couple mistakes, and it just kind of and getting out of hand. From the Seattle side, I think their biggest weakness, while that defense, look, is great, the one thing they've been susceptible to is quarterback scrambles and rushes. And so I think for them and for Drake May, if they're going to win this game, Drake May is going to have to use his legs. And I think that also helps with a young quarterback because you can almost let him know, like, hey, if your first, second read's not there, get out. Like, don't try to make a play. Don't try to, fit it in a window. Just get out. And that's where I think Seattle's biggest weakness. I could see, Drake May. Look, one of the bets I have on one of the bets I have the Super Bowl is Drake May over 40 rushing yards, and I think that is a lock. And so, again, that's biggest advantage for Patriots coaching staff. For the Seattle, the defense, which is kind of weird because also their biggest weakness is one particular part of their defense. And then biggest weakness for the Patriots, it's got to be that O-line Will Campbell. All right, and lastly, we are going into the Super Bowl pick. And I'll give y'all one. I'll give y'all who I think is going to win. Next, I'll give you – right now, we'll just go with that. So for my Super Bowl pick, I'm going with Seattle. I'm also taking Seattle -4.5, which I know is actually not really the side that a lot of the smart money's on. But I'm going with Seattle. How I see it playing out, I think they get a lead early. And while Josh McDaniels has been a great OC over, how many years and has coached in 10 Super Bowls, there's one thing about him. He is never a Josh McDaniels led super offense in the Super Bowl has never scored a first quarter touchdown. And they've only ever scored 3 points. So even when you're talking about Brady in his prime in the Super Bowl, never scored a first quarter touchdown. And I think that's where I think Seattle can get out to a lead. And then that's where that defense can become really, really special. And it can get really hard for Drake May because then you're playing from behind right out of the gate. And so I think that is what happens. I think Seattle does get out to that early lead. I think they then are able to kind of get that pressure on Drake May. And I think Drake May is still going to make some really big plays, but I think they're going to be able to get pressure on him, cause him to struggle a little bit. And then because they're going to be playing from ahead, like I said, I don't think either quarterback's going mistake free this game. But because they're going to be playing from ahead, I think that is going to allow them to overcome that mistake that Darnold makes and also kind of give that sense of relief to Darnold. It's like, okay, I threw a pick. We're up 10-3 or we're up 10-0. And so I think that kind of gives him that freedom where Drake May, if he's down 7-0, 10-3, 10-7, and then he makes that mistake, if Seattle goes down and scores, I could see that really being an issue for Drake May as he's moving forward in that game. And so that's what I have there. As far as score goes, I'm going to go, let's see, 27-20. You know, 27-17 Seattle is what I'm thinking the score is going to be on that. But look, man, appreciate y'all as always. Let's Be Real podcast, Super Bowl edition. Look, like, subscribe, rate us, whatever y'all want to do on our social media and interact with us. Click the bell on YouTube, subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever y'all listen. And look, I appreciate y'all as always, and we'll talk to you next week after the Super Bowl.